Speaking moistly. Speaking moistly.
Welcome to Speaking Moistly. The mouse worked that time. And with me as usual, Greg, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. I'm caffeinated.
Nice.
I am fully vaccinated except for this new vaccination, but I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I was going to say, how'd you get your second shot? What's your secret?
No, I'm going to hold off for now.
Yeah. There's so many questions and just not nearly enough answers. Earlier in my show, I think it was today or maybe yesterday, faith in the quick test leads to an epidemic that wasn't. This is a New York Times article that talks about an epidemic that got created by using PCR tests in 2007. And I shared this with Greg just before the show. I said, you got to read this, man. I want to talk about this. And you just got to read this because I want to talk about it. And basically, the story is there was a whooping cough. And instead of using the usual test that they would use for whooping cough, which is culturing, I guess, in your mouth or wherever, and then trying to grow the bacteria that causes whooping cough, they used a PCR test. And a whole bunch of people were laid off. Some ICU beds were stopped. And then a couple of weeks later, when they couldn't grow any of the bacteria or any of the virus, whatever it is that causes whooping cough, they were like, "Oh, guess we were wrong." So
yeah, and just to emphasize, this article is from 2007. The part that stuck out to me was epidemiologists at the Society of Healthcare Epidemiologists of America said pseudo epidemics happen all the time. And this is information we've known about. And I guess in the context of what we are now, it's almost like in 2020, they just wiped all medical history clean slate. And it's like, we're going to start a new narrative now when it comes to everything. Okay. You know, like it's so disturbing how, you know, information from the past, trends from the past, norms from the past, when it comes to like all these different things, doesn't seem to matter unless it fits the narrative, right? And it sucks because it's obvious that it's political to people like you and me, but like not everyone realizes that. But it's obvious if it's political when everything in history, everything that's ever happened, any little piece of medical information, it just becomes a piece of fodder to support the narrative or to be debunked because it doesn't fit the narrative, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that even from masking to PCR tests, the article says, like, we know faulty pandemics are a thing that could happen with this kind of pseudo pandemics are a thing that could happen with this kind of test. We're well aware of that problem, you know, and we're using bench science that should be, or that is typically kept on the bench, like in a lab, in the general public. And maybe that's not such a good idea because it sometimes leads to this catastrophic kind of outbreak, but it wasn't a very big one. So, you know, good news in 2007.
Yeah.
And now we're living through this nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, and isn't it funny how back then epidemiologists are like, yeah, sometimes people go crazy, and like, you know, it's almost like a larger version of being a hypochondriac where an entire community kind of gets on board with this hysteria. But it's like suggesting that today literally gets you banned off YouTube and stuff, or like even like talking about it gets you completely unparalleled. It's crazy. We can't have enough fear. Okay, there's no such thing as too much fear. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's true.
And it's like it's just another aspect or another dimension of how the conversation around health has been completely perverted and completely rigged to only support certain ideas.
Well, and it's not like 2007 was all that long ago. It's not like 2007 was the 1800s.
Yeah, but you're right. But and this is like you can make a whole podcast about this, like the changing of how our world changed in between the mid 2000s up until now. And it wasn't just the radicalization of politics with Trump. It was also the introduction of the smartphone. And along with the introduction of the smartphone is kind of like the acceleration of how we consume news digitally. And with that, the finessing how we get people's attention, finessing how we can make that money through the internet. And that all kind of comes together with in the social dilemma, that popular, I don't know if you saw that documentary about social media, but it talks about how it's like, our algorithms, it's exploited, like, the worst part of human nature.
Yeah. Well,
So we're already kind of euchred in terms of like us giving into like little clickbait things, and then getting tribal because we're kind of pushed to be more tribal about something.
yeah.
And I think that you're right. 2007 wasn't that long ago, but a lot's happened that makes our reality completely unrecognizable.
Yeah, I agree. But there's other situations and things that happened too. In 2009, there was the situation where the UK had the swine flu, the H1N1, and GlaxoSmithKline got. I think
Sure.
it was
Yep.
GlaxoSmithKline. They got
Yep.
in a lot of trouble because of their, what was it called? Because of fear mongering. The government, like, they charged them with a bunch, and then their vaccine that they came up with gave kids narcolepsy, and the government had to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars because of the
Yep.
narcolepsy. This is 2009. This is like a decade ago, or just a little bit more. So it seems like from masking to PCR tests to hysteria allowed by people who stand to make a ton of money on this, it seems
Yeah.
like why would we? And I just wanted to point out, I've got the Wayback Machine here, and I can't access any Wayback versions of this article. I don't know if it's a Wayback Machine problem or whatever, but I think that it's very strange how, and I talked about it, like I could access it this morning. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I think that it's very strange how we've gone from a society that would look at the reality of the world. I don't know what does that even mean, right? That would deal with a very different set of problems in 2007 than we would deal with them today. And there's no room for debate today. And in 2007, there was seemingly lots of room for debate. So that's interesting.
I made a tweet months and months and months ago, but it basically said, if you want to understand the world we live in, you need to consider how efficient propaganda has become. Not just how efficient it is at distribution, but how efficient they've become at measuring its effectiveness and like catering it to specific people. And 2007 is a great year to point out, because An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2006.
Ooh.
And of course, we remember 2006 was Al Gore, Inconvenient Truth, ice caps are going to melt.
Yep.
The propaganda wasn't good enough. Sorry, Al, you didn't scare us enough. You didn't get us global warming. That word did not work. They tried it out. It didn't work. But then climate change, boom. Greta, boom. Like the ways in which they are shaping our view of the world. Walruses falling off of cliffs on some Netflix show. Boom. I don't know if you've seen the walrus clip. But
Yeah,
it's
I
like
saw
this,
the walrus.
it's become this like fear porn of like, whoa.
But I think I think that it's interesting because the idea of the climate change wasn't scary enough. I think you're right. I think they're going to try and use the model that they've built for the pandemic here, and they're going to climate change it, right? Like, because of the climate, we need to do this. Klaus Schwab is already making some kind of noises about that, I think a bit. But I mean,
just along those lines, like people's brains are total mush now. Like I really don't think, I used to have little faith in people being able to really think for themselves, but like now it's like gotten worse. You add the COVID, you add the BLM, you add it's an anniversary of George Floyd's death, by the way.
Oh yeah.
It's International Fentanyl Overdose Awareness Day. Pardon me, but no. And then you have friggin' the Palestine Israel conflict. There's just so much that goes on and goes into a person's head. They don't have a chance.
It seems
of trying to make sense of any of this stuff.
I haven't mentioned anything about the Palestine and Israel thing. It seems to me this is a really easy thing, and all these people pledging fealty on one side or the other, like the people on the internet saying, I'm with Israel and then I'm with Palestine, and then they get into arguments about this. I saw there was a guy out in Mississauga, I think it was, and he was interviewing people. He said, why are you marching right now? And the guy went off on like a minute and a half of like very aggressive talking about it, and he was saying how the Israelis were like Nazis and they deserve X, Y, Z, and we're Palestinians and we're brothers, and he's talking about deans and things. And I was like, okay, it seems just ready-made for this easy division, ready-made for people to slide into one camp or the other camp. And I think they were trying that with not Black Lives Matter, but like you're either with us or against stuff. Like if you think all lives matter, you're against us. And that wasn't as clear cut, so it didn't drive the argument so much. But this one works for that, and they're letting the protests go. I don't know. It seems.
I don't comment on the issue itself because
I'm not commenting on the issue.
I'm having enough kind of trouble learning about the history and the reality of Canadian politics, and it's like I know I'm never going to understand the Palestine-Israel conflict in its entirety. But I agree. Like, you know, aside from the actual like details of the conflict and its long history, it manifests for most people, you're right, as this kind of divisive thing of like, you know, either free Palestine or like, you know, Israel is a legitimate state, whatever. And I think the takeaway is, man, these Western countries really don't give a shit about their own country when they're like, they're so passionate about this issue. And it's like, what about Canadian issues? What about Canada? And then of course the argument is like, well, this is really, is it though? Is it?
Yeah.
Is it really? Because it's like, you know, these massive protests happening in Toronto for Palestine or for Israel, you know, it's like, what about the country you're living in and like, you know, taking advantage of our welfare system, for example? Like, it's just like, it just goes to show how sort of unimportant Canada is or thinks of itself in terms of it just kind of being the lowest possible rung on political importance of what's actually happening in our own country that you actually live in, and where you can actually vote and everything.
Yeah, but I think that part of that is the shaping of the messaging, right? Like the Palestinian message or the Palestinian protest, the Israel protest, that conflict protest gets lots of airplay. The Jewish people being attacked is being highlighted, and not how terrible this is, but it's like we're going to highlight that we're attacking Jewish people, and then interviews with Jewish people, Christian pastors being arrested. There seems to be some kind of like if you had a protest, let's pretend that was like, you know, we really dislike this, whatever it is. It can be anything. We really dislike C10. They might let C10 protests happen. We dislike immigration. Let's use immigration as an example, right? Just a middle of the road, something that Canadians have disagreed on for at least 40 years, since the 80s.
Sure.
So immigration, we're going to have a protest on immigration. You wouldn't get news time on that. They wouldn't talk about that. They wouldn't. If they did, they would imply that you're alt-right. They would probably outright say that you're a white supremacist, and it wouldn't talk about the issue at hand. They wouldn't address, say, the price of houses or the difficulties of finding an entry-level apartment. So supply versus demand. They wouldn't address any of those issues. So while I agree with you to a degree, I think that our media is to blame for a lot of it, because they definitely will highlight the, you know, you're either on this side or this side. Pick your flag of choice that's not a Canadian flag, and then minimize, you know, anything that has to do with our country, right? And I think that's an issue, and it's one that doesn't get highlighted. And I think that we should talk about that.
Yeah. I actually learned about this in university. I went to school for media studies. It was a lot of theory on media. And they basically say, you know, like, news is sensationalized. It's not here to solve any problems. And especially isn't now. It's only gotten worse. Yeah. And it's about driving clicks. It's about causing outrage. It's about starting arguments. It's did you think that we were trying to help something? Did you think we were trying to add something productive to the conversation?
Yeah.
Well, it's
do you know who
it's brutal.
Do you know who Andy Kaufman is?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Andy Kaufman.
The man on the moon.
Yeah, he used to go on Letterman or the late night shows. He used to go on the late night shows, and he would call on the wrestlers. He'd be like, oh, I'm stronger than you, Jerry Lawler, and Jerry Lawler would come on to the late night show, and then they'd have a wrestling match, and like Andy Kaufman.
So stupid,
Right, but people realize, like, listen. They realize, they being anybody who watches human behavior, they probably knew this beforehand, right? That people will come back for that conflict, even if it's a fake conflict. Instead of having a real conversation about a policy, they will initiate two people fighting about something seemingly mundane, And now the argument is, now the news is about the two people fighting and what they're fighting about instead of the thing that is actually worth talking about. And I think it's a distraction thing, or a way to get people not talking about the main thing.
And I mean, the way to think of it is like, there could be a couples therapist, there could be like a counselor at a high school who's going to try and like, help two people get along, and they would have a certain conversation. They would focus on certain things, healing, whatever it is, understanding each other's perspective. But we have the gossip queens. We have like the scandalous, like Mean Girls, who are running the news to be like, did you hear that they actually, he was saying, they said this about you. Can you believe that? Like, they're only irritating it. They're only making it more inflammatory on both sides. Mm-hmm. And as I realized in, getting involved in politics, I'm like, this isn't even about these different issues at this point. This is about like people even having like any sort of intelligence anymore. Like, if we lose these battles over the next like 20 years, we're just going to have idiocracy, a dumb population that is just like drooling at the mouths and just watching Ow My Balls on their little like pods all day. If you haven't seen Idiocracy, watch it.
Oh, it's a great movie. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
I think that we're almost halfway there.
He interrupted Ow My Balls. He interrupted my Ow My Balls show.
But I think that we're almost there with some of the things that I see on Netflix. Like some of the crap on Netflix these days. Like the floor is fire. The floor is lava. Have you seen this? That's a real show.
I had a dumb moment. I'm like, I want to watch that. I want to see what that's about.
Well, there was another show on Fox where you had to like make a shape with your body, and if you didn't make the shape with your body, then the paddle thing like pushed you off into a water trap.
It's high art, Mark.
Yes,
it's high art. You wouldn't understand.
We've reached the high watermark of human civilization.
We're peaking right now. Yeah, the floor is lava. It's humanity peaking. Okay, we're peaking right now. Enjoy it.
Okay, so why don't we talk about how old do you think that a child needs to be in order to consent to an experimental vaccine? Ballpark it for me. I think it has to be the age of consent. It has to be 18. You have to be over the age of 18. Oh, sorry. Let me rephrase. In John Tory and Justin Trudeau's Canada, what do you think that age would be?
Well, you sent me something. You messaged me something, and it basically said, if the person administering the vaccine thinks that the kid is like got chops, this kid. I think this kid knows what he's doing. I think he has the faculties to make his decisions. Yeah. No, I don't know what voice that was.
It was very it was almost Cosby.
Yeah, it's I don't know, man. Like you need a permission slip for a friggin' like school trip, but it's like injecting something into your bloodstream. Hey, this kid knows what he's doing. Yeah. Hey. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's 12 plus. So Dr. Silverman says, new position statement from the Canada Pediatric Society. They say key points. And so this is, how many weeks have they been injecting? This is like 3 hours ago that they've released this statement. They've been injecting children for how long? And the Canadian Pediatric Society comes out today and says, just fine. They say key points recommended for 12 plus, prioritize kids at risk for severe disease. Are there any kids at risk for severe COVID? I don't think there are.
That's right. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I was going to say you.
Sorry, I'll just promote household members of those too young to be vaccinated. Be prepared to answer questions from kids. How? There's a lot of questions on this. I haven't even done a deep dive on this. I wanted to talk about the Nathan Phillips Square, the ice cream promise, coercion. But this is, I'm shocked at the cavalier way our society is saying, you want to inject our kids with something? Here, there. Like, I think that's weird.
Yeah, absolutely. Because once again, like these people's own science doesn't line up with the claims they're making. It's like, this is the most unaffected population. And I wanted to talk to you about this before the cameras even came on, but I'll just say it now. It's like, is it weird to say if I was a parent, I would like want my kid to be exposed to COVID so their like immune system could like, beat the shit out of it and learn very early on what it looks like and all that sort of stuff.
Based on
like, am I crazy? Is that crazy for me to say that?
No,
and it's like, oh, you want to expose your kids? You want to expose your kids to like viruses and things like this? Yes. because they're young and have a very strong immune system.
Yeah.
And then they can learn how to overcome it.
Well,
Like
and
it's
that's how
we've
the human.
yeah, we've totally abandoned this idea. And once again, the like reality of what synthetic mRNA is never talked about by anyone. And it's just like, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I'm sure you know the feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think that they've got this idea that offering ice cream is something that will benefit these kids. Offering ice cream to get them to take these jabs.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of people who are buying into that, and I think that that's very strange. I think that the impact of like literally experimenting on children who are, as you said, at low risk, because they're all the numbers that we have really underline that they're low risk. And so I agree with you that
and like that's not like,
well, hold on, I'm going to finish.
Okay.
But I agree that we should be allowing kids to live normal lives, not necessarily going out of our way to expose them to something like that, but letting them live their normal lives and letting their immune system deal with it, as we have done for the last 120, 130, 150 million years, right? However long humans have been around.
Yeah.
I think that it's a weird thing to say, like you might get sick, and so we have to make sure that your immune system doesn't come into contact with that because it might learn how to deal with it. Like, what?
Yeah. And I want to emphasize, you said low risk. Like, they're not just low risk. They are like the very, 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 very lowest risk.
Mm-hmm.
And that should absolutely be emphasized. I think what's connected to this is like a broad sort of resentment that these Gen X, millennial parents, boomer parents, or whoever is now having towards kids. Like, oh man, like these kids, like, why can't I just like travel to Thailand all the time? And like these kids are always like getting people sick, which I think is a really sick idea that people are getting, of like resenting kids and stuff like this. It's not.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I agree. We can come back to that in just a minute. I want to talk about the adults. So we're prioritizing 12 to 18, which are very low risk, because we've just identified. But we're not prioritizing giving adults or people in the whichever range their second dose on a timely rate. We're doing it to appease, I don't know, teachers or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what. They have a plan that they want to have all the students done before school.
I think it's about getting your foot in the door. I think they're trying to make as many sales as possible while it's hot. Get your vaccine, get your first dose, get in, buy in now, buy now.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
I think that's the idea. And isn't that weird how it's like, trust the science, and then it's like, well, it doesn't really matter if you get the same dose. Like, it can be some other dose. And it's just like, it's funny how like when it suits them, it's just like the science is whatever. Okay. Like
you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of climate change science. It's the same. The mask science is the same as climate change science. Like, don't look too deep at it. Like,
yeah. I mean, there's probably a good quote somewhere about like, if you can't question something, or if somebody can't answer simple questions, then it's not science, it's politics or something.
Yeah. There's probably some pithy quote, but well,
some Mark Twain quote
somewhere. Okay, we'll move on to touring.
Post it in the comments. Post the quote in the comments.
Reopening Ontario had a goal of having 60% vaccinated, I guess, by the middle of June. And Toronto says 65% of Toronto adults 18 and older are vaccinated. So, like, it doesn't seem like anybody's really planning to open Ontario anytime soon, does it? It seems like, and Manitoba just extended their public health orders. Remember, they locked things down on the May long weekend? They say May long weekend public health orders extended to protect Manitobans and the healthcare center, and healthcare system. So, like, ding, like, lucky you. Your lockdown has just been extended. You can thank us later. Ding. Like,
it's insane. It's totally insane. They keep moving the goalposts.
Yeah. I
mean, really, what else is there to say? You talk to normies and they say, "Oh well, it's just and this is the new plan." Although I have talked to some people who are like, I think it's totally messed up that they're coercing people into getting vaccinated. Like, they said it was about cases and now it's about vaccinations. Like, that's kind of weird.
Yeah. So that was a quick change.
I'm hoping that as lockdowns continue, I'm hoping it's going to backfire. And when Canadians are like refused in Toronto at local marinas, COVID bylaw officers have stopped people from going out on their boat. And it's like, if that's not going to radicalize a Canadian to be political, I don't know what is. So the government saying you can't go on your boat on this beautiful, nice day because
I take the
laws, new laws that we invented last week.
Yeah, I take the fun. All right, last one, last story today because we got to go. I gotta get to the pool. The kids want us to go swimming at 3. Who am I to say no? Facebook's campaign to silence COVID vaccine victims has just been officially exposed. Heads will roll. So Project Veritas exposes the dirty dealings of big giant tech giants, and Facebook got exposed today. And apparently the whole thing with this is they deboost anybody who's talking about vaccine adverse events or anything like that. And kind of like they did with Trump. And this guy's saying like it's not an even platform. It's basically a shaped platform. If you say what they want you to say, then you can say it. Otherwise, nobody will see it. Wild, and especially around the fact that they don't want the vaccine adverse effects or anything like that exposed, and that's being suppressed actively on Facebook. And there are other people spending big bucks to promote their vaccine opinions across the internet as well. So interesting times.
Yeah, it is interesting times. And this is what I try to explain to people who are like newer to politics, because occasionally my friends and family from my past will be like, hey, I'm getting into politics and it's confusing. And I tell them like, it should be a red flag for anyone that you can't even have a neutral opinion on something, or when you can't even have a differing view on something. One thing is to like be like a raging like flat earther or whatever, but it's another thing entirely to be like, I don't know if I trust this vaccine. And like, it's as simple as just having a statement like that. And like, it's become so polarized that even having a neutral or questioning attitude about something makes you bad or gets you censored. Like, this is a huge, huge, huge red flag. We don't even have to talk about the details of what has or hasn't happened or getting into the details of the stats or the facts. Just the fact that you can't even talk about it, you can't even question it. Like, this should be a huge, huge red flag for everybody. And it's crazy because, you'll tell this is happening to normies. Oh, there's this censorship, and they'll be like, I don't see it. I don't believe it. I don't see it. I don't believe it.
Yeah, but there's been a push to say that this is important to implement.
Daddy,
hold on a second.
Warm. It's super windy.
Okay, we're back. Darn kids. I'm just kidding. Okay, it is time for us to go. So I agree with what you're saying there, man. And I think it's wild. I think what's happening is just an incredible situation that. It's like if you slip on something and you try and regain your balance and you can't, and then the fall happens in slow-mo and you're like, this is going to be bad. I feel like we're on the way down. Or like you're in a car and you brake. Like, I was in a car accident when I was like 17 or 18 in my dad's car, and it was in the wintertime, and the brakes I was probably going too fast, but the brakes, somebody made a U-turn in front of me, and I was following, I don't even think going too close behind them. But anyway, I T-boned them because the brakes stopped working. Like, we just slid. And it's not like I didn't touch the brakes or anything like that. I tried, but the brakes, it just not enough room to stop. And it all felt really slow, right? Between the time of realizing that you're going to, like, this person's actually doing this. And it's like, oh no, it's all really slow. And that's where I feel like, we're on the way down. We haven't quite hit yet. And it's like, once it hits.
Well, that's a decent analogy. And they say, if you're in snow and you're going off the road, you shouldn't slam on the brakes. You should be like, okay, I need to try and that being said, if you're going to T-bone somebody, that's different. But I guess
it was like analogy, 15 to 20 kilometers an hour. It was very slow.
Right. So the analogy for falling, though, is, to save yourself, you shouldn't try to resist it too much. You should try to I'm falling. I'm just accepting it now. And trying to kind of brace for impact, I guess. Yeah. Because it's true. With so much chaos, with so much going on outside of our control, it's out of our control. Yeah. Folks, we can't control it. We can't control what's going on out there. Yeah. So we need to take care of ourselves first and foremost. And I suggest logging off Twitter every now and then, going for a walk, taking a nice deep breath, reading a book, you know?
Yeah. I read
Yeah.
Twitter when I'm walking.
I don't know if I would recommend that. I enjoy the fresh air, man.
All right, that's enough out of us. Where can they find you, Greg?
Find me on my YouTube, Greg Wycliffe. I just dropped a video, a music video about the news. Go watch it. It's a fun little 2-minute song.
It is.
I think you might enjoy it if you enjoy speaking moistly. You can find me on Twitter and TikTok at GDub, GDDUB, double D. Thanks,
Nice.
Mark.
And I'll put the link in the description. I think I was listening to it before in the green room while we were setting up. And you can find me at CanadaPoly.com. CanadaReport.co is my scratch pad where I'm putting all the stuff that I'm working on. And SpeakingMoistly.co has our back catalog. Check it out. And thanks for watching, everybody. Let's see if we can get the Prime Minister to play us out. This hasn't been working recently. Okay, here we go. We'll try.
Keep 2 meters apart. Speaking moistly. Speaking moistly. Keep 2 meters apart. Speaking moistly.
What a terrible image.